Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. And today we are culminating our anti-tank infantry slots discussion that we've been doing for, goodness gracious, almost 3 months now, by looking at the top 10 infantry anti-tank options in Bolt Action 3rd edition. Looking at, army specific anti-tank options, some that are more generic, like AT rifles and flamethrowers and stuff like that. And now we're pulling it all together, okay, to figure out from a tank and armor removal standpoint or pin generation in order to lock it down sort of standpoint, which ones, in my opinion, are definitely worth pursuing in your army. Okay. And so in terms of what we're doing, we're going to use, kind of some similar stuff that we've been looking at in the past. We're going to look at opportunity cost. So, the more expensive something is, the more points it's going to lose in that category. Cheaper it is, the more points you're going to see. How reliable it is at generating pins, because some anti-tank options like flamethrowers and AT rifles, for example, really benefit from the fact that they are pretty good pin generators. And that is advantageous, even if they don't necessarily remove the vehicle outright. The pins might actually be the reason for taking them. We're then going to distinguish between light armor and serious armor removal. There are some things that will work just fine against a DV7, DV8, maybe. Vehicle, definitely DV6. But when you start getting to 9, 10, 11, that's going to be a lot harder for them to do anything to. Only specific anti-tank options for infantry-based teams are going to be able to do that. And so because of that, we want to reward the things that are getting a really high penetration value in ways that are different from just, oh, well, yeah, you would definitely remove something that's a tankette or an armored transport or a light tank, right? We then rate durability, which we've done. It was a lot easier to do, I'm not going to lie, when looking at vehicles. It is a little bit harder to do with infantry-based stuff because now you've got, multiple wounds in the event that something has 2, 3. In the case of a squad-based weapon, 5 to 10 or more men in it. And so because of that, the way I landed on it is you get half a point for your level of veterancy. So inexperienced would give you half a point, regular would give you 1 point, veteran would give you 1.5 points. And then separate from that, so you wouldn't maximize that based on the number of men in the unit, you get an extra half a point for each model that you have. So a 5-man squad, 2.5 points. That is veteran using, say, a flamethrower or a Sturm pistol or something like that, would get 2.5 points from the 5 men. They would get 1.5 points from their veterancy, which would give you a rating of 4. Okay. Similarly, a 2-man regular squad would give you 1 point for the veterancy because it's 2 half points, and then 1 point because it's 2 half points for the number of models, which brings you to a score of 2. Okay, it's basically how that works. And then finally, from a utility, special rules, abilities perspective, we'll give an extra 1 point per rule. And that means that in a few cases, some units are going to have actually quite a few rules that help them out in terms of removing enemy armor, staying alive, being able to do their job better, getting and, maneuvering over into position a little bit more easily. And all of that is going to benefit you. So what counts for the purpose of infantry AT options? Okay, first of all, it has to be capable of wounding armor. So we're looking at heavy weapons only. Machine guns are great. They do help you against open-topped vehicles. We are not rating medium or light machine guns when we look at this. Okay. The second is it has to be infantry-based. So if it's on an artillery choice, if it's on a vehicle, we're not looking at it. Okay. But it does mean it does include other infantry, like actual infantry sections that are not in your anti-tank option. It also means that team weapons like mortars, for example, were reviewed. A bunch of those weird, wacky, funky sort of options that do exist that are not necessarily within the AT options category. All of those are being reviewed. So, there are quite a few. I think I reviewed 22 different options, some of which we haven't even done videos for yet. Because, for example, as those who've been following the mortar discussion, no, we haven't done medium and heavy mortars yet. Because the heavy weapons platoon is coming, but we're trying to finish up stuff that can be tied to things like the recce platoon and the rifle platoon as well, so that way we can start getting those things rolling. We also did look at unique weapons. So if there was a unique option that's only available to, say, like one nation, right? Things like the Sturm pistol, Japanese lunge mine, the I would say the British Piat, except now Commonwealth is separate from Great Britain. So, at least as far as I know, because we haven't seen the Commonwealth book yet. Soon and very soon, got about 12 more months before we start getting word on that. But things like, the bazooka, stuff like that. Well, actually, I guess bazookas and partisans too. Yeah, so even the bazooka isn't unique to one specific nation, but anything that's specific to only one nation and only one nation gets it, we did review it. It is present here. So keep in mind, obviously, when you're looking at your force, you may not have access to everything that's in the top 10. Okay. And then finally, we are looking at tank removal. So pins are good. It will help to elevate certain things. And if there's a close tie between two options, it might push somebody over the top. But that's not the primary ranking device. The primary ranking device is, are you capable of removing armor from the game? And so, with some honorable mentions to get us started, first of all, the Goliath team. I'm mentioning the Goliath team because I think I'm the only YouTuber, maybe Hollywood Wargaming way back when, to ever do a video on the Goliath demolition mine. So I'm just gonna mention here, like, it's a swingy thing. If it goes off, it's big, right? Like, it really, really matters, okay? And you still do have anti-tank grenades afterwards. So it's not like once you blow it up, you're done being an anti-tank option. But it's only 3 men with AT grenades. So you're looking at like a pen +1, pen +2, which is not much, right? It is not reliable because you're probably hitting on 4s or 5s. There's almost no living way you're hitting on anything better than that. And so because of that, like, yes, it technically could be really big, but it's super swingy, and swingy in my experience meant it wasn't going to pay off as well as some of the others. Okay. By the same token, forward observers, whether that's the air observer, the artillery observer, if they come in, and in the case of the air observer is not driven off, the case of the artillery observer, if it actually lands with damage and not just pins on the vehicle, in either case, it's going to hurt against that vehicle, right? Worst case scenario, they're going to take a bunch of pins. Realistic scenario, you're probably going to do serious damage to it. Okay, regardless of what you roll on the air observer chart, certainly because you're getting that pen +4 heavy howitzer +1 for it being the top armor, pen +5 against whatever you're dropping it on, like, something's going to happen. Even to more serious armor, you have a very high chance of something happening. The problem is it's just super swingy, right? Did it arrive? Did it land where you wanted it to? Did the vehicle scoot out of the way so that way when it did come in, it came in right where you called for it and the vehicle wasn't there? There's so many things that can happen that made it so that as I was looking at it, I'm like, it's too many variables for me to confidently say that it's better than the other options that made the top 10. So while these did perform well, again, out of 22, they were not higher than the top 50%. Okay. Similarly, mortars and VB launchers, they're not bad because, again, you're hitting top armor, right? And if you're getting an open top vehicle, not only do you get that +1 to wound against the top armor, so you're adding +1 to your penetration. So now you're looking at 2, 3, or 4 instead of 1, 2, or 3. You're also getting a +1 on the damage chart. So the chance that they're just a crew that went down is gone, basically. And you're much more likely to at least immobilize them, if not set them on fire or destroy them. You're very likely to do that in ways that none of the rest of these can do. Nothing else gets a bonus of damage chart. The problem, of course, is that they are extremely unreliable. Sometimes you roll that 6 early on. Sometimes you don't, and you're headhunting the 5, and then before you can headhunt the 4, the vehicle moves a decent bit, and now you're back to 6s again, right? So and then there's counter battery fire to be factored into that because you tend to be the subject of counter battery fire from high explosive damage, which means you might be wiped out before you can range in. And so as I looked at it, I'm like, you know what? Mortars, VB launchers, as nice as they are, I just don't think the indirect fire is going to be as reliable as the others, especially since with the transport, you can turn pretty much all the rest of these into 3s out of the box. So toward that end, I was like, okay, I think I'm just going to pass on these, but just know things like the medium and heavy mortar did perform pretty well. Heavy machine guns. From a pin potential perspective, the HMG team is fantastic. In fact, out of everything on this list, it is unparalleled because with 6 shots, looking for probably at worst 6s, you are probably going to get at least a pin against an enemy vehicle. As long as it isn't veteran at standard or long range at DV8 or veteran at long range at DV7, which is not particularly common. The problem, of course, is that removing, unless you can somehow hit it in the flank early on, possibly at point blank range. But again, like what, I can't think of a single HMG team that can do that reliably. It's probably not going to happen. Okay, that's just the nature of things. And then finally, anti-tank grenades. Again, the biggest issue behind this was, one, it took a nosedive in the opportunity cost section, because to really make AT grenades work, you kind of need like an 8 to 10 man squad. So you're already spending probably somewhere around 100 plus points. So your score and opportunity cost at that point was already at like basically 0. And so it was going to keep it out of the top 10, pretty much. The other thing too, of course, is that as you lose models in the squad, the effectiveness of the attack goes down, and it is extremely swingy, right? You could take 8 men and only end up with a pen +2. It does happen, and I've seen rolls like that. And so because of that, because again, the swingy side of things, I looked at it and I said, while some armies like Norway have to rely on this as one of their few ways to reliably do anti-tank removal, I'm sorry to say it, I don't think it's going to quite make the top 10 out of 22. And so, with no further ado, let's jump into it. Number 10 is one we actually covered pretty recently, and that is the Sturm pistol. Basically, it's a pistol-mounted grenade launcher. It's really, really short range. It's only 5 points. It is a cheap baby Panzerfaust with only a pen +3 and only a 6-inch range, so half the penetration and half the range. But you can fire it every single turn. It's not a one-shot weapon. And so while you do need to get close, it's on an engineer unit that probably wants to buy a flamethrower, which also only has 6-inch range. So getting within that 6-inch range is really not a big ask for this particular thing. And since it's only a 5-point upgrade, if you find that you have 5 points lying around, I mean, hey, a pen +3 weapon that is also pen +3 against a veteran infantry squad, so that's wound on 2s, and potentially an HE 2-inch blast because it has shape charge, even though it's a relatively small grenade that's being fired here. It's not particularly powerful. Apparently it blows up just like everybody else. And so because of that, like, it's a nice multi-tool. Now, I think there's a legitimate question to be asked, which is, if you're going to take this squad, specifically the Assault Pioneers, the Sturm Pioneers for the Germans, because it's the only one that it's available on. So you're paying for veteran, you're paying for engineer special rule, and you're going to pay for something like this. Like, technically, you can take this thing for like about 85 points or so, assuming you're going to throw some submachine guns in there or something like that. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, why wouldn't you just take a flamethrower? Right? Flamethrower is going to be probably better because not only is it getting close to that pen +3, but it's also applying a whole lot of pins. It is more multi-tool against infantry than the Sturm pistol is, and you get the morale check at the end. So as long as you're not hitting a lot of stubborn and fanatic troops, you might do more removal even against DV10, DV11 armor than you can with this thing, right? So, like, it's fine. It's okay as an option, and especially if you just don't have a lot of points and you're like, well, I want to just try this out, especially if you modeled up the model like I did, then hey, it's not a horrible thing to have it. But yeah, just let's be honest here. Sturm pistol, I don't know. It's fine. It is more reliable than some of the other options, especially since, again, you're always going to be at point blank range. So you're probably hitting somewhere around 3s or 4s, possibly as low as 2s. And so because of that, it is pretty reliable, which is really nice. And so because of that, in my mind, it came in above a bunch of the others. At number 9, we have a related weapon that's also only available to that same Sturm Pioneers unit, and that is the GRV-39 grenade launcher. Now, this costs 30 points, which is the same as 2 Panzerfausts, and it's basically a flamethrower in terms of cost, right? Which is quite a bit. And it only has a pen +3. Now, admittedly, it's every turn, which is nice, okay? But it also has a second bonus, and this is the thing that kind of moves it ahead of the Sturm pistol. First of all, it has a 24-inch range. So it hits with, admittedly, half the firepower of a Panzerfaust, but also double the range of a Panzerfaust. It's the same as a Panzerschreck. And it's less than half the cost of a Panzerschreck. And admittedly, it's about half the cost of a Panzerschreck if you cut out the cost of the 20 points you're paying for the men. And so the result is, like, it's not horrible, but it also gains an HE 1-inch shot generally. So you can choose to either shoot the pen +3 with just your normal 1 pin, and then whatever your damage result is, or you can fire an HE 1-inch template. So it's effectively a light mortar that, as far as I can tell, only fires direct. I don't see anything in here that says that it fires indirect fire on the 1-inch HE, which is really nice because it means if you're going up against really big armor, or if you don't think you're going to penetrate it, like let's say it's a damage value 8 and you're like, Pen +3 is not that likely to do much. That's 5s to glance, 6s to wound. That's not much. You could just say, well, what I'm going to do this turn is that I'm going to go for D2 pins on a 1-inch HE template rather than trying to actually penetrate the armor and just do the 1 pin. I'm going to try to stack more. And to be clear, D2 does not equal 2, but it is a whole lot faster way to get to 2 more reliably than stacking 1 every single turn. And other than the flamethrower, this is like the one of the few ways that an infantry-based anti-tank weapon that is not indirect fire only can apply more than 1 pin on any given turn. And I found that to be extremely useful. Once again, the reason why it's landing here at number 9 is because since you got to take this in an engineering unit only, why aren't we just using a flamethrower? Because the flamethrower is going to have basically the same pen because it's going to be hitting top armor, so it's going to be pen +3. You're going to be looking at, admittedly, yeah, you got to get in close, but you're an engineer unit. You're probably planning on getting in close anyway. You probably have a transport for them. And so toward that end, like, why wouldn't you go for D3 +1 pins instead of D2, hitting probably more reliably, and then a morale test coming afterwards, right? So, like, there's a lot of stuff here that makes me think GRB 39, very useful. I think it's underappreciated, but I also think there are probably other options that people might choose. At number 8, continuing on with some German stuff, and I promise I don't just hate the German stuff. I'm just telling you, yeah, they tend to be expensive. That's part of the problem, and they tend to be pretty niche, and the Germans are experimenting a lot, so you should just know they appear everywhere. The Panzerschreck. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I have gotten some really good work out of Panzerschrecks. However, 80 to 100 plus points for 2 guys is fragile. And the fact that in most cases, especially if you want to utilize that 24 inches over and against another option that we'll be reviewing a little bit later that has the same penetration, if you want to utilize that extra range, you're probably hitting on like 4s or 5s, possibly 5s or 6s. The other big issue for this is that because you're sitting at somewhere between 80 to 106 points, you have artillery options that have a similar or possibly even on par level of firepower. And they're more durable, they're more resilient, right? And we talked about this in the Panzerschreck video, so we don't need to cover it all right now. All you need to know is, as an infantry-based option, this is not the most efficient way to use your points if you're trying to knock stuff out, okay? And so because of that, while yes, this is cheaper than taking a full armored vehicle with a heavy AT gun, which would also be pen +6, and it's shape charged so it doesn't get the penalty of pen -1 at long range, and it has a chance to do an HE 2-inch blast just like a heavy AT gun against infantry in a building. Like, there's a lot of things that are good about Panzerschrecks, and that's why it does make it into the top third, or I guess just shortly out of the top third. But there's also a reason why it appears here near the bottom of the list. It does hit hard, and it might even get to fire more than once, but this is going to be a public enemy number 1, and people are going to try to remove it, and it's not that hard to remove. And unfortunately, unlike some of the other nations with their army special rules, none of the subtype rules really for the Germans help a lot with getting the Panzerschreck to a place that's more survivable, and so or help to make it a little more worthwhile for the points that you're paying. And so in my mind, like, you can definitely take them. I think there might be some better options available. At number 7, and again, I promise I don't just hate the Germans, okay? And this might surprise people. I might get some flack for this, and that's fine. We have the Panzerfaust. The Panzerfaust is a shorter range Panzerschreck. It's only got 12-inch range instead of 24. It is only 1 shot, so my recommendation is you take it in pairs. You should be taking 2, possibly 3 or 4, if you really want these things to work. But the benefit is, unlike everything else pretty much that's in this list, you get more than 1 shot, right? You can fire off as many of these as you want to on a given turn, as long as guys are within range. And so because of that, you can stack your firepower. And as we mentioned in the Panzerfaust video, what you're really paying for is that board control and that threat range. It's the 6-inch range of movement plus the 12-inch range to fire, which is an 18-inch threat range, which is a lot of the board, right? Especially if you can start moving them in toward the center of the board. It's really hard to stay away from these things. And people start thinking, oh my gosh, if that actually hits, even if one of them hits, pen +6 is going to really mess up my vehicle. And so there's kind of a mental game. And to be honest, if it does hit, especially a lighter vehicle, it is going to do something serious. And if it hits something like DV9 or DV10, at least you have a reasonable chance of doing actual damage instead of just a glancing hit, right? The the other thing that benefits this is the fact that you can take it in a squad relatively cheaply. So in this case, we reviewed it with a 5-man veteran squad, so we would get 8 points there. It didn't push us too far, and then they took 2 Panzerfaust. That brings us to 95 points. Yeah, the opportunity cost is high on this, but it's pretty survivable. It's pretty durable by comparison to the other stuff that we've been looking at, because it's more than just 2 to 3 men hanging out together with a heavy weapon. This is 5 men hanging out with 2 heavy weapons. And so, like, it isn't horrible. It's definitely worth taking. I think what you'll find is, one, they tend to do best on veterans just to keep the squad alive, right? And to make it so they can get within that 12-inch range of somebody's, especially machine gun heavy style armor. The second issue, of course, with this is that, one, if a model that's in the squad is beyond 12 inches, you're not measuring the 12 inches for the Panzerfaust from the closest model to the vehicle. So you have to actually move the squad relatively close to get more than one Panzerfaust in range. The second issue, and the bigger issue when it comes to the Panzerfaust, is the fact that if anything near that tank, or heaven forbid the tank itself, goes on ambush, the Panzerfaust's 12-inch range is an extremely high liability, because you know that those ambush units, even if you have them in a transport, they're going to wait to shoot. They're going to wait until the unit drops out, and even if it means you get cover from the armored transport as you're going in, they're going to take those shots. With the thinking being, well, worst case scenario, we're going to put some pins on these things to make it so that way they're now shooting with a -1 to hit. Now they're, even if, if they're moving up even at point blank range, they're going to be hitting on something like 4s, which means the chances that you hit with them is relatively low. And if you can do a lot of hits and then wounds against the unit, you might even pop some of these before they have a chance to fire. And so because of that, they're not bad. They're very good, actually. And if you're running Germany and you want to have some infantry-based AT, I think this is the way to do it. I think it's the Panzerfaust, with maybe only one exception, which I think we're going to be talking about next, if my memory serves me correctly. But in general, in my experience, when playing with Germany, and really any of the Axis powers that get access to Panzerfaust, if I want serious armor removal, I'm taking a vehicle, because the vehicle is going to do it more reliably. It's going to be more durable, be able to take more hits. Company commander will keep that vehicle continuing to fire as I need it to. The Panzerfaust is fine until the unit gets mauled to bits. And when that happens, Panzerfaust is not nearly as useful. You might find that they completely miss, and then you wasted 30 points on 2 of these, which is a lot of investment for a lot of potential risk. So I think it's good, but I think for about the same number of points, you can get more reliable, more steady, more solid firepower for other nations, and even potentially for the Germans. And so on that topic, let's talk about the AT rifle team. Now, I'm going to get some flack on this because it's a Pen +2 item that almost made it into the top half of the list. But that being said, I think it deserves to be here for a couple of reasons. First of all, I mentioned that pin generation was going to break ties, and I saw one-shot or very expensive stuff alongside super cheap, relatively easy to spam, super easy to outflank, and for a lot of armies that rely on AT rifle teams, they have ways of getting benefits to outflanking, so you can remove that -1 penalty for coming in. And as soon as you're outflanking, now you're closer to Pen +3, possibly even Pen +4. So toward that end, now we got a very, very spicy 25-point regular anti-tank option. Okay. Now, to be fair, you'll see there that there's a nice dip in the middle here. We do have to be honest, against light and serious armor, unless you can wrap around an enemy, you are not actually likely to remove them. That being said, if there are 4 of them, and only half of them hit in a given turn against a vehicle, you've done close to the number of pins that a flamethrower would do. And there's a non-zero chance that between your 100-point investment in 4 AT rifles, beyond just the fact that you get more order dice, which is exceptional, if you have anything else that tries to shoot at those tanks, they're probably going to be rallying instead of actually fighting. Because, I mean, at best, they take a fire order with an AT gun, they're sitting on 4s to hit becomes 3s to hit, because it's an AT gun becomes 4s to hit because they still have a pin on them, right? Even a company commander doesn't help them to ignore that problem. And the result is they can make armored vehicles highly inefficient just by virtue of pinning them and applying that -1 to hit, let alone if the unit actually has to take a turn doing a rally order. And while that's not the same as removing the armor per se, it won't clear them off of an objective. It will not end up, removing the order dice to score victory points. But what it will do is it will make sure that that unit isn't actually activating in a way that hurts you, right? You've locked it down. And as you start continuing to stack, company commander benefit will help them to pass order tests. It does not keep them from running away. And so, in my opinion, I think the AT rifle team is actually a highly effective anti-tank tool. Not only because you can actually remove especially light armor with this thing. It's not particularly difficult to do as long as you play it right and you move correctly and you get to a nice spot where you can pin things down or, as necessary, swoop in and then hit it from really nice and close, possibly in the flank, at which point now you're looking at pen +4 for 25 points, which is phenomenally good. But I don't think it's enough to break the top half. I don't think it would be quite fair to put it into the top half because it does require some advanced techniques in order to make this happen. You do need to kind of really get to know them and play them well in order to make those things occur. And so at number 5, as we get to the top half, we have the Piat. I rated this as a 50-point veteran Piat that paid an extra 2 points to take the guards upgrade. Okay? Which I know people like to complain about guards because it does seem like the go-to option for Brits in terms of subtypes. But I think on a Piat, this thing is really good. I mean, at 50 points veteran, so relatively difficult to remove, you've got that pen +5. Sure, it's only a 12-inch range with the 1 attack, but you can fire every single turn. You're relatively durable between veteran with cover, ability to remove 2 pins upon passing the order test, which, again, you're a veteran. If you have an officer nearby, you're probably going to pass, which means you actually have a decent chance if you pop out of a transport first of hitting on 3s. Because even if they shot at the transport to apply pins, you'll remove 2 pins when you pass your order test to advance out of the transport. So you very possibly might not even have pins on you. And then, so that's going to be 3s to hit, which is phenomenally good if you can get to that point blank range, which is exactly what you should be doing. And then from then on, because of the fact you can remove 2 pins when you pass an order test, you might just be able to leave them there as long as they're in a nice place of cover and then just keep shooting on 2s every turn in order to remove stuff. Now, you got to protect your Piats. It's very important. But if you can protect them, like, you can make this work, okay? And they're very easily delivered in close, mostly because Britain has a really large number of armored carriers that even go as small as like 3 or 4 guys. So you don't have to make a dramatic investment in order to get these guys up. You could take an officer, platoon commander, for that sweet morale bonus, with 2 of these guys hanging with him. Heck, you could take a Bren carrier that has capacity for 5 men, and you could take 2 of these inside with a, call it a platoon commander. You probably want something like a company commander if you want to jump them both out on the same turn. But just suffice it to say, like, you have options, right, for what you can do. And I think that's phenomenal. And it can be relatively easily achieved to make them highly, highly effective. And so as I look at it, while the Piat didn't rate nearly as high for me last edition, I think there's a lot of space for these, especially because of how many of them you can take between your platoons now. At number 4, we have the Flamethrower. Flamethrower did rate higher for me last edition. This edition, as everybody knows, they took a nosedive. And honestly, I get it. It is one of the units that needed to be reined in. It was causing things to be a lot less fun on the board, and we were seeing a lot more flamethrowers on the table than was historically the case. But in this case, because of the fact they'll be firing at the top armor, even though they started only pen +2, they become pen +3 because they're always hitting the top, which is really nice. 6-inch range is not great, and you can't get the pen +2 for firing at the rear because it specifically says it always hits the top. So even if you could flank around and get to the rear, you can't say, well, I'm going to hit you in the rear and I'm going to do pen +4 instead of pen +3. It's always going to be pen +3. But you're going to be putting on D3 pins +1 for hitting, which is really nice. And then there's the morale check. So you have a second chance to try to remove stuff, which is legit, and it's really great. And it's one of the highest pin generating options out of everything we reviewed, which is really nice. The problem, of course, is that you have to spend a lot of points in order to get this thing because typically you're going to be buying more than 5 dudes because you want to keep it alive. And then you got the thing, and then there's any sort of specialized weaponry that you're going to have on it. So it's going to be pretty expensive. That being said, 2 chances for removal every time you fire it isn't horrible. I could not in good faith put it in the top 3, though. 1, because if it runs out of fuel on a 1 or a 2, there's a reasonable chance you might end up only getting one shot with these. It could become a one-shot weapon. And at the cost you have to pay now for flamethrowers, it's a very expensive one-shot weapon. Okay. Second issue is, since it does a pin to itself every single time, the enemy only has to shoot at your unit like once or twice in order to make sure that on future turns, even if you're standing still trying to burninate something again, because maybe you immobilize the vehicle on the first go, even if that's the case, you're still not going to be hitting on something like twos. It's going to be something like threes or fours, depending on how things go. And so there's too many factors that play into this in order to make them really, really efficient. They are really efficient. If you're Germans, this is another really good way to be able to take it that I think will work better than something like a Panzerschreck. Might even work better than a Panzerfaust. Crazy. Definitely better than some of the, kind of wild and wonderful weapons with grenade launching that we saw earlier. But just suffice it to say, I do think they're really solid. I think there's still a place for them. I'm in agreement with the Aussie crowd that says, no, they still totally work. Don't abandon flamethrowers entirely. Engineer platoons are totally worth taking. But I don't think that they're in the top three. Because in all three of the top three are really good at removal. They can either do it quite often, or they can do a whole lot of it all at once in order to make sure that something is probably going to work. And so at number 3, to kick us off as we look at the bronze medal, we have the Japanese lunge mine. To start off with, 14 to 26 points for a pen +8 is crazy good. There's just nothing else to say about this. You will admittedly not be very good at generating pins because you only get to attack once, right? Extra selection means that you can pretty easily spam these. Now, it's only extra selection once per platoon. So you can't do 9 of them in a heavy weapons platoon like you can with something else that's still here on this list, okay? It is relatively fragile. They just got to sneak 1 wound past cover on this guy. But he does have Infiltrator, which means he gets a +1 to his cover save. As long as he doesn't have an advance or a run order. And newsflash, you should pretty much only be giving him a run order when you're ready to rush this dude at the enemy, okay? He also does have to assault in order to do damage, so it's relatively easy for people to catch him with things like assault, with ambush and things like that. So, you do have to take care of it. And of course, the biggest issue with the Japanese lunge mine, in my mind, what keeps it out of the top 2, is that you could roll a 1 on the damage chart and the vehicle just goes down. You could roll a 1 on the to wound roll because your to hit is automatic because you ran into him. But if you roll a 1 on the to wound roll, it just doesn't work. It's a dud, right? And the guy's still gone, right? Nothing was actually done to the tank. And you are guaranteed to lose the order dice. Now, because of the fact these guys are so cheap, you're guaranteed to have quite a few order dice, right, in your army, as long as you're building around that with that way of thinking. But there are a good number of scenarios where the opponent is going to get victory points because of every order dice that is removed, and this one counts against you, and you might not remove an order dice in return. So it is a high risk, high reward sort of scenario. That being said, if you're going to do it with something, and you can see it from the light armor and serious armor removal, this is the tool to do it with. You're going to do it on a pen +8, because a pen +8 means that light armored vehicle, a damage value 7+ tank cat that you run into with this thing, which is still great for value, right? I mean, 4 of these guys taken across, your rifle platoon and 1 slot in your heavy weapons platoon. 4 of these guys are probably costing on par with that DV7. Definitely 3 of them, assuming that you take them veteran. If you take them regular and experienced, even cheaper than that, right? And then 1 of them is very likely, as long as you get a 2, you're very likely to remove the enemy, right? And when you're looking at even damage value 8 or damage value 9, the chances that you're doing full damage, if not great damage, is still really good, right? I mean, it's full damage against the DV9 on 2s, right? So on the whole, I think it's fair to say it is really hard to beat this for removal. It's just that it has quite a few trade-offs that you make, and there are quite a few ways to plan around these things in order to make sure that you're ready for them, most notably the ambush order. So, I think it does deserve to be in the top 3. I'm sure Tiki's going to be happy seeing that this is in the top 3, and he's right to think that it should be here, because from armor removal for an infantry-based thing, this is what you would want. The question is just, can you work it into your strategy and make sure that you can still win the game at the same time? At number 2, we have the bazooka. I know a lot of people like to hate on the bazooka. I don't really understand why, because it's fantastic. It's an actual multi-tool with a good amount of penetration that can work at a lot of ranges. First of all, yes, the 24-inch range means you might not end up at point-blank range, but if you have a transport like an M3 White Scout car, which is my personal favorite, alongside 3 bazookas and a company commander who can snap all 3 bazookas and the scout car in the same turn, you can get very easily with that doubled movement on roads to point blank range, drop 3 guys, all shooting on 3s. That's 2 hits with a pen +5, very possibly a pen +6 for getting to the sides. Now you're looking at really good removal, even against something that's like damage value 9, which is about the highest you're likely to see on average in a given game. And so because of that, like, you can do this, and you can do it for relatively cheap. I mean, that build, it's not particularly difficult to get. You're looking at, what, like around 300 points or so in order to get every turn crushing something, not to mention doing pins with the M3 White Scout car, right? And with the company commander around, you can make sure that the bazookas are actually activating reliably, even when they start taking pins. But more than that, these guys actually do get some benefits to be able to make sure that, unlike everybody else, they're not shooting at 5s as early as turn 1. Because you can take these guys veteran for 80 points by tacking on that Rangers lead the way special rule. They start at veteran 78 points, pay an extra 2 points because there's 2 dudes. And now you get a free 12-inch move that doesn't trigger ambushes before turn 1 begins, which means you could start the board basically halfway up the board, which means you start with a fire action instead of starting with an advance action. And that means now you're hitting on 4s, possibly even better than that if the enemy chooses to push up, right? If there are objectives in play, the enemy may not be able to hang back with all their armor. They may need to come in at you. And so, worst case scenario, you wait to activate the bazookas, you give it a little bit of time, go down if you need to, just wait for them to come in. Or you can choose to just say, hey, I'm going to snap, I'm going to activate a bunch of these guys, we're going to send a bunch of rockets down range, and these rocket-propelled grenades are going to do the work for us. And so, I know a lot of people like to say bazookas aren't worth it, bazookas aren't worth it. I'm sorry, guys. I've gotten a lot of good work out of these things before, blown up a lot of armor with these things. I think that they're worth taking, and I think you should be giving them a closer look, okay? But I don't think that they're the best. I think for partisans, they're probably the best, and I don't know how that would be argued with because the armored vehicles they get access to are not particularly great. But I think that in general, there is one anti-tank team that is better than all of these. And I was expecting these to be toned down this edition, and I suppose they might still be toned down when the army book drops in a couple months. But we haven't seen any evidence that that's going to happen. And that is the Soviet Dogmine team. Probably not that surprising. They've been really good for a long time. But just suffice it to say, they tick the box in basically every category. Okay. You can take 4 of them inexperienced for only 52 points. And that's before factoring in something like, say, if you wanted to put, I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's anything useful right now in terms of subtypes that are coming for the Soviets. I can't really think of any that you'd really want. Tough fighters is not necessary at all. Suffice it to say, though, like 52 points for 4 inexperienced guys that you can just put like in a transport, relatively cheap transport with an officer, company commander in there in order to make sure people are going off and doing their thing, or just run up on their own. Like, these guys, they'll transport nice and easy. You got dog mines for basically 4 points each when you purchase them in experience. It becomes 5 points each at regular, 6 points each for veteran. That's crazy for costs, right? I mean, you're getting 4 of these for the same cost as a Panzerfaust. And the beautiful thing about this is that, yes, while the unit itself is relatively fragile, or especially if you buy them inexperienced, you ignore to hit penalties, which means you ignore advance, and you ignore the inexperienced -1 to hit penalty with the way it's currently written, which means this is pen +5 at 18 inches. That's a 24-inch threat range. So it's the same as a bazooka or a Panzerschreck. It's the same as the best of the best that we've seen on this list. I mean, the only thing that tops it for range is the AT rifle and the heavy machine gun, right? And technically the air observer and the artillery observer, kind of, a little bit, maybe. But it's always hitting on a 4, even if you take it inexperienced. And that's phenomenally good, especially since you can take 4 of these and you can fire them off as many or as few as you want at a given time. So if you know, hey, there's a damage value 6 plus soft skin vehicle with a bunch of dudes in it, let's just wreck that really quick. Just send one of them that way. And then you could take the rest and just say, let's really make this really painful for an M4 Sherman, right? And you can wreck his day too. And you're probably going to hit with like 2 or 3 of those on a given turn, which is crazy. Okay. But more than that, Much like we saw earlier with the Goliath mine team when we talked about it as part of our honorable mentions. Once they're done firing off the dogs, rip, really sad, they still have AT grenades, which admittedly on 4 dudes is not particularly great. But at least they still have an anti-armor option available to them. And so in my mind, this is the all-around. They can be relatively durable for relatively cheap. You get quite a few special rules out of these, by the way, that are very, very useful. You can apply quite a few pins in a given turn. If the enemy has a lot of massed armor, I guess you could technically fire one dog at each of them if you really wanted to, right? And you could go after multiple vehicles all at once. Maybe hit some, maybe you don't, maybe hit all of them, right? Like there's a lot that you could do. And especially against that DV7, DV8, that pen +5 with no long range penalty because it's not a shooting attack. We got that clarified in the errata. Means, I mean, you're pretty reliable to do damage to that. And even against serious armor, like you at least get to do pins to it, right? You're at least going to be doing a pin to it as long as that dog runs underneath and the mine blows up. So on the whole, if you're playing Soviets, I'm not saying leave all the AT rifles at home because I think the AT rifle does help to fill other niches and other roles. I am saying you should seriously consider not leaving the Soviet dog mine teams at home because I do think that those are very useful. You can probably pass on the implement launcher. I know some people really like it because setting things on fire is really fun. Fair enough. I don't think it's particularly useful, so it didn't make the top 10. I know that there are some others that people may really like. I know the Blacker Bombard didn't make this. You guys might feel particularly bad about the fact that the Observers didn't make this. So I would love your feedback. What do you think? Is there something that should have made the top 10 that didn't make the top 10? Will I get one person telling me why the Goliath mine working as a pen +7 should have been considered over something like the Sturm pistol? Fair enough. Feel free to make the argument down below, and I will see you next time.